Imagine the opening minutes of a high-end strike where every radar operator is waiting, every sensor is listening, and every defensive system is built to see you coming. You can picture the glow of screens in a command center, the routine discipline of operators watching for patterns, the quiet confidence of a network that believes it owns the sky because it owns the information. In that world, the easiest targets are the ones that announce themselves early big signatures, predictable routes, transmissions that give shape and intent away. The hardest targets are the ones that refuse to become a clean track, the ones that force the defender to guess. And then the aircraft that shows up is shaped like a shadow, engineered not to disappear from reality, but to degrade the defender's ability to turn detection into certainty. That's the real reason the B-2 became famous. Not because it is invisible, not because it's futuristic for the sake of it, and not only because it's expensive, but because it was built around what modern air warfare treats as one of the hardest problems of all. Penetrate sophisticated defenses, strike precisely, and come home. The B-2 spirit is a convergence of radical aerodynamic design, low observable engineering, mission planning discipline, and sustained modernization. And when you look past the mythology, you find an aircraft whose every major feature points back to one purpose: strategic reach with survivability. Officially, the aircraft is described in blunt, mission-focused terms: a multi-role bomber able to deliver both conventional and nuclear munitions, designed to provide long-range strike capability on a global scale. That framing matters, because it explains why the B-2 sits in a different category from most combat aircraft. It isn't built for short-range presence or daily tactical patrols. It exists to create access when access is denied, to hold critical targets at risk, even when the environment is heavily defended, and to do so with a probability of survival that changes an adversary's planning. When people speak about the B-2 in strategic language, stealthy, long range, built to penetrate, they're describing an aircraft meant to be used when the stakes are high enough that standoff and hope is not a satisfying plan. To understand why the B-2 matters, you have to understand what modern defense looks like when it's working the way it was designed to work. Air defense today is not a single radar or a lone missile battery. It's a layered, networked ecosystem that tries to compress time. It detects, tracks, identifies, assigns, and engages, all while feeding information across multiple nodes, so that the system as a whole can respond faster than any individual component could on its own. The defender's advantage is supposed to come from turning the sky into a managed space, where the attacker is discovered early enough to be forced into predictable behaviors, and where predictable behaviors can be punished. This is where stealth becomes something more than a buzzword and something less than a fantasy. The most accurate way to understand stealth is as a reduction in certainty. Not invisibility, not immunity, not magic, but a deliberate effort to make detection harder, tracking less stable, and engagement less reliable at the very ranges and aspects where defenses prefer to operate. A defense network lives and dies by the quality of its track. If the track is intermittent, ambiguous, or late, everything downstream begins to degrade. The engagement timeline stretches, the weapon solutions become less clean, the handoffs become riskier, and the defender may be forced to make decisions under doubt rather than under confidence. And in the real world of complex air defense, doubt is not a small problem, it is a structural weakness. Think of air defense as a chain of requirements, rather than a single event. First, something must be detected. Then it must be tracked with enough stability to predict where it will be next. Then it must be identified with enough confidence to justify action and prioritize response. Then it must be engaged with a weapon whose guidance depends on the track staying coherent long enough to matter. Stealth doesn't erase the aircraft from the sky. It attacks the chain, and it attacks it in ways that compound. A later detection leaves less time for tracking. A weaker track complicates identification. A delayed identification delays engagement. A delayed engagement forces either a rush shot or no shot. In this sense, stealth buys time, and time in air warfare is not simply a convenience, it's an operational weapon that changes what is possible. The B-2's reputation comes from the fact that stealth is designed into the aircraft as an overall condition rather than an add-on. It isn't a normal bomber coated in special materials and called stealthy. It's a bomber whose shape, edges, and overall configuration are part of the stealth system. That's why the first thing most people notice is the silhouette, because the B-2's flying wing configuration is the organizing principle behind the entire design. By minimizing protruding surfaces and eliminating a classic tail, the aircraft presents a cleaner, more blended form that supports both aerodynamic efficiency and low observable goals. On conventional airframes, the intersections between fuselage, tail, and control surfaces create angles and reflections that are rarely friendly to signature management. On a flying wing, the aircraft becomes a single lifting body, and the geometry itself becomes part of the survivability strategy. There is another benefit hidden inside that same design decision, and it's one that often gets overshadowed by the word stealth: efficiency. A flying wing is an elegant way to generate lift with less of the structural and aerodynamic penalty that comes with more conventional layouts. In strategic aviation, efficiency translates into reach, and reach translates into options. If an aircraft can go farther with fewer dependencies on nearby bases, fewer permissions, fewer vulnerable staging points, it becomes harder to predict and harder to block. Range is not glamorous in the way speed is glamorous. But range is the difference between being a regional tool and being a global instrument. The B-2 was built to be a global instrument. But the flying wing doesn't come for free, and the cost is not just money. Removing a traditional tail changes the stability and control problem across a wide range of speeds, altitudes, and mission conditions. On classic aircraft, the tail provides straightforward stability cues. On a flying wing, the aircraft must be stabilized by design choices that are distributed across the wing and by flight control logic that can keep handling predictable. This doesn't mean the B-2 is unflyable without computers in some dramatic sense. It means the B-2 is a systems aircraft, where the shape that helps stealth and range also demands an equally sophisticated approach to control and management. It is a choice that forces the rest of the aircraft to become an integrated network of solutions rather than a collection of separate parts. Once you accept that the B-2 is an integrated system, other design choices snap into focus. One of the most important is the decision to carry weapons internally, because the B-2's overall concept depends on keeping the outside of the aircraft as clean and consistent as possible. External stores add drag, but more importantly for low observable aircraft, they add edges, corners, and surfaces that create reflections and discontinuities. Those discontinuities complicate signature control, and they invite the defender's sensors to do what they do best: find patterns. By keeping the payload inside, the aircraft preserves the very characteristics that allow it to approach defended airspace with a better chance of remaining difficult to track and difficult to interpret, while still carrying enough mass to be strategically meaningful. This is why the B-2 is not a light stealth platform. It's a stealth platform built to deliver heavyweight effects without losing the posture that lets it get close. Stealth, however, is not only a function of shape, and this is where the B-2's real-world story becomes less cinematic and more demanding. Low observable performance depends on the aircraft's surfaces, seams, edges, and materials being maintained within tolerances that matter. In practice, stealth is as much about sustainment discipline as it is about design brilliance. A stealth bomber that cannot be maintained is a stealth bomber that cannot be counted on, and an aircraft that cannot be counted on cannot fill a strategic role. Behind the scenes, there is a constant fight to preserve low observable condition, inspections, repairs, careful handling of surfaces, attention to details that most aircraft can ignore, and a readiness culture built around the idea that signature is a form of combat power. This sustainment reality also helps explain why the B-2's cost is not simply a headline about procurement. The price of the B-2 includes the continuous effort required to keep its advantages intact. It includes the infrastructure, the specialized processes, the time, and the modernization cycles that keep the aircraft credible as threats evolve. In stealth aviation, readiness is not only about fuel, engines, and hydraulics. Readiness is also about whether the aircraft can still perform as intended in the part of the mission that matters most, the moment when the defender is trying to turn suspicion into certainty. And that brings us to a deeper point that often gets missed. The B-2 is not simply a bomber with stealth. It's a bomber designed to manipulate a system. Defenses are built around assumptions about what an incoming threat looks like and how quickly it can be classified. The B-2 exists to stress those assumptions. It is meant to make the defender work harder for every update, to make the defender commit resources under uncertainty, to make the defender's best-case engagement geometry less likely to materialize. Even if the aircraft is detected at some point, the question becomes whether the defender detects it early enough, tracks it cleanly enough, and holds it long enough to produce a shot that has real probability. The B-2's mission is to shrink that probability. The aircraft's mission identity as a multi-role bomber capable of both conventional and nuclear missions is not just a fact sheet detail. It defines how the B-2 is positioned in national strategy. Conventional strike is about precision, reach, and the ability to hold targets at risk even when defenses are sophisticated. It is about the practical utility of getting effects where effects are needed, without relying on a permissive environment. The nuclear role, meanwhile, exists in a category where survivability and credibility matter as much as raw performance, because deterrence is ultimately about belief. A nuclear-capable bomber is a strategic signal. It says that even in the worst case, there is a survivable way to deliver decisive force, and that the adversary cannot confidently solve the problem of stopping it. All of that strategic meaning would be theoretical if it never translated into operational reality, which is why the B-2's combat history matters so much. The moment that people most often point to is 1999, during Operation Allied Force, when B-2 South struck targets in Serbia. This matters because it was a demonstration of the aircraft's intended value: long-range strike, precision attack, and survivability in a contested environment. The significance isn't only that targets were hit. It's that the concept of operations, stealth-enabled penetration paired with strategic reach, became real tasking under real conditions. A defense system can be impressive on paper, but war is the moment when the paper has to hold. In a contested environment, defenders want to push attackers into standoff. They want to force launches from far away, along predictable corridors, with long timelines that can be tracked, managed, and countered. Standoff weapons can be effective, but standoff also trades one set of problems for another. The defender gets more warning, more time, and often more opportunities to concentrate defenses around likely axes. Penetration, when it can be done, changes the geometry. It compresses the defender's timeline. It attacks the assumption that the defender will see the strike coming early enough to shape it. In 1999, the B-2's operational debut wasn't just a technical milestone. It was a statement about what kind of access was possible. After 1999, the B-2 became associated with the broader idea of global power projection. And this is where you can feel the aircraft's design philosophy connecting to the real world. A bomber built for reach is most valuable when the world is uncertain, when basing is complicated, when timelines are short, and when the targets that matter are protected by more than just geography. Over the following years, the B-2 was employed as part of campaigns where the ability to strike at range, with precision and with survivability characteristics that complicate defenses, was central to the logic of the mission. The details that become public vary, but the strategic theme remains consistent. The B-2 exists for the missions where access is contested and the cost of failure is high. In the early 2000s, as the United States conducted long-duration operations in Afghanistan and later in Iraq, the B-2's value as a long-range precision strike platform became part of the broader story of how air power was being used. These were environments with different threat profiles compared to a Cold War-style integrated air defense. But they still highlighted what the B-2 was built to do: travel far, carry significant payload internally, deliver precise effects, and operate as a high-end tool within a much larger force package. The B-2 story here isn't just about stealth, it's about the strategic convenience of a platform that can be tasked across distance, with fewer dependencies, and still deliver meaningful results. Later, when the B-2 was associated with strikes during operations such as the 2011 campaign in Libya, it reinforced a pattern that has become central to how the bomber is perceived. The B-2 is a platform that shows up when the mission demands a high level of confidence in access and precision. In conflicts where political constraints, basing limitations, or the desire to reduce risk to other aircraft complicate planning, a stealth bomber with global reach becomes an option that planners can build around. The B-2 is not about being the most common tool in the toolbox. It's about being the tool that exists for the hardest jobs. The jobs where the environment is actively trying to deny you the ability to act. But there is a reason those appearances feel rare, and that reason is simple. The fleet is small. The B-2 is commonly discussed as a fleet of 21 aircraft, and that scarcity is not just trivia. It changes everything. When you have a small fleet, each airframe carries more strategic weight. Each maintenance cycle matters more. Each modernization schedule is more delicate, and each deployment is a stronger signal. Readiness rates, sustainment planning, upgrade timing, and training all become higher stakes because you don't have deep redundancy. A small fleet amplifies consequences, and it amplifies meaning. When a B-2 deploys, it stands out not only because of what it is, but because there are not many of them. That scarcity also intensifies the importance of modernization, because the B-2's relevance is not guaranteed by its shape alone. Threats evolve, sensors improve, networks become faster, data fusion becomes more capable. Electronic warfare changes the conditions under which aircraft communicate and coordinate. And as the environment becomes more contested, survivability becomes a broader equation. It includes signature, yes, but it also includes how well the aircraft can sense the environment, how well it can manage emissions, how well it can integrate with other forces, and how well it can execute complex plans in a space where communications and navigation can be stressed. Modernization, in that sense, is not cosmetic. It's the difference between an aircraft that remains credible and one that becomes a museum piece with a famous silhouette. This is why the B-2 story is inseparable from continuous improvement. A stealth bomber built in one era must be adapted to survive in the next. Because the defender gets a vote, and the defender is always trying to close the gap. The center of gravity increasingly shifts towards software. Integration, connectivity, and the ability to operate within a wider force network, under contested conditions. A low observable airframe is powerful, but it's not enough by itself. The aircraft must remain a modern participant in modern operations. The B-2 endures not only because it was built around a hard problem, but because it has been kept aligned with that problem as it changes shape. There is a deeper loop that ties all of this together, and it's why the B-2 remains so conceptually important. The flying wing supports efficiency and low observability. Efficiency supports range. Range supports access. Access creates strategic options. Those strategic options justify the sustainment and modernization required to preserve low observable performance and mission effectiveness. Modernization preserves credibility. Credibility supports deterrence and operational planning. And that brings the story back to the beginning. The B-2 exists to make the defender's certainty fragile, to force doubt into the systems that are built to produce clean answers. When you step back and ask what makes the B-2 spirit extraordinary, the answer depends on what you value most, but each answer points back to the same core. If you value engineering, you see a flying wing shaped around survivability and efficiency, an airframe whose geometry is part of the stealth system, rather than a container for it. If you value strategy, you see a platform built for access and deterrence, able to deliver conventional or nuclear payloads with global reach. If you value operational relevance, you see an aircraft that earned its reputation in real mission history beginning with 1999, then maintained its place through ongoing modernization that keeps it viable in modern threat environments, where the defender is constantly trying to reclaim certainty. The B-2 is expensive and rare, yes, but rarity and expense are only meaningful if they produce options that would otherwise not exist. The B-2's mission set isn't about being everywhere. It's about being able to go where few platforms can, and about doing so in a way that changes the defender's planning calculus. That is why it remains a strategic asset rather than merely an advanced aircraft. It is a capability designed to show up when the environment is hostile, the targets are protected, the timelines are tight, and the need for confidence is high. Before we end, bring it back to the simplest framing. Official descriptions of the B-2 emphasize a multi-role bomber with conventional and nuclear capability. The public language around it emphasizes stealth, long-range reach, and penetration of sophisticated defenses. Those phrases can sound generic until you realize what they imply. A design built to survive where the environment is actively trying to deny you. A mission built to reach far without compromising the ability to strike precisely. and a sustainment and modernization effort built to keep the capability from aging out of relevance as threats evolve. That is the B2 spirit in one sentence, an integrated answer to one of the most difficult questions in air power. In the end, the B2 doesn't vanish. It forces doubt. And in air defense, doubt is a weapon.